NFL fans get a late September must-watch football game as the red-hot Minnesota Vikings travel to Lambeau Field to face off against the, don't look now, but we're 2-0 without Jordan Love, Green Bay Packers. We're here to break it all down, so grab yourself a drink because it is time to pour another Packers podcast. All right, Shade McGee. Well, there are about 1,000 different thoughts and avenues that I could have taken and would have taken and decided not to take about not only what just transpired down in Tennessee in last week's matchup, but as we look forward to the Minnesota Vikings, I decided to throw it all off the table. I don't have a whole lot of notes. I'm just kind of hoping that some of this stuff just comes to me throughout natural conversation. But I do have one thing that I'm going to kind of, place a stake or place a flag, stake a flag. I'm going to stake a flag in this conversation. And that is the idea of belief. Belief is going to be my overarching theme in this episode because this will tie in later on in the episode. But I do want to tie it in right away because if there's one thing that the Packers have going for them right now is that they believe. This entire team believes in what is going on, what Matt LaFleur is preaching, the direction that the organization is heading. You can see it on the defense. You can see it on the offensive side of the ball. I love what we're seeing on that aspect. So I'm going to continue to bring up the whole theme of belief. At least I believe I will. I see what I did there?
I believe.
All right.
I believe.
But there's a lot of different avenues. I do want to spend probably 10 minutes realistically going over what happened down in Tennessee last weekend. We'll transition over the Vikings game as we do from these week-to-week episodes. But rather than me pick whether we start on the offensive side or the defensive side or any topic, I'm just going to kick it over to you. What would you like to talk about first in this episode as we kick it off?
Yeah, I feel like last few weeks we've started with the offense. Let's start talking about that defense.
What do you want to say?
Ultimately, this Packers defense is hot. They are creating turnovers. They closed out that game. That was, we do our good, bad, and ugly. That's one of the good, if not great, aspects of this past week's game was that defense. I mean, 8 sacks, 2 of them by Wyatt, who had a sack in week 2 as well. 3 turnovers, 1 of them a pick 6, which I called it. I said defensive touchdown this week.
It was only a matter of time. It was only a matter of time.
And it was a beautiful one, too. I mean, Jair jumped that route, and he wasn't going to be touched to the end zone. So yeah, the defense looked incredible. Granted, it was against a struggling offense, but that's what you want to see out of your defense is when you play these offenses that aren't clicking on all cylinders, aren't, are creating their own turnovers. You got to capitalize on that.
Are you wearing those sunglasses the entire time?
I mean, they're my victory sunglasses.
Where were they last week?
I had them on last week.
Okay, that's right. I might have edited that first part of the video out.
I was right at the end of overtime. I threw them back on.
So to your point, yes, the defense came out and showed up. And probably what I think we were all kind of waiting to see. And it's let's give out the flowers. Let's give out the flowers to the defense. Yes, we faced off against the Colts in week 2. We faced off against the struggling Will Levis and the Titans team in week 3. But the defense did what they needed to do. And it really wasn't until that Jair Alexander pick 6 that the game really started to break open. Green Bay marches down the field on a beautiful play action pass to Jay Reed on the first play. A beautiful catch by Christian Watson. There was that 30-yard pass. There's 2 30-yard passes on that first drive. Then he rushes it for a touchdown. We go up 7-0. Titans immediately answer. And that was probably the most nervous that I was throughout the entire game was when it put 7-7. It's like, shit, we got to go out there and do it again. They managed to put a drive together, kick a field goal, but then Jair had that pick 6. And that was when the game broke open. And really, there was no looking back from that point. The defense is come alive to the nth degree. They have a total of 9 turnovers 7 interceptions, which matches the 2023 season total under I want to say Joe Burry, because I wanted to bury him in the grave for whatever reason. I don't know. There's some sort of subconscious thing there that came there. But under Joe Barry, 7 interceptions last year. We've already matched that in 3 weeks. And speaking of the number 3, Xavier McKinney, who, well, I'll just pull this over because I don't know if I'm going to be full screen the entire time. Xavier McKinney shows up and shows out with his 3rd interception in 3 games. Absolutely stud. We're going to throw him off the side for now. But yeah, defense definitely showed up. And yeah, they're putting pressure on the quarterback. 8 sacks in the game. That is some ridiculous production out of that defensive front. And it wasn't even necessarily, Rashawn Gary or Preston Smith or Kenny Clark that was doing it. They got people coming from all over this place. You had Cooper that went in there for a sack. You mentioned Wyatt that had 2 sacks in the game. You had Nixon, who was actually quoted saying he's never blitzed more in the entire last season than he has in the first 3 weeks of the 24 season. Athlete's showing up. He's showing out. He's got this team believing. He's got this defense believing, and we're seeing it across the board. Yeah, that's the first of many that I'm going to bring up believing.
I see what
Go ahead.
did there. Okay. Packers lead the league in interceptions with the 7 interceptions that they have this year so far. And like you mentioned, matches the total interceptions we had all last season. That's a big deal. Turnovers are what make or break. We've talked about it in previous weeks. Winning that turnover battle is super important. And they're doing it week in and week out, which is great to see. And to talk about Wyatt again with his 2 sacks this week 3, and then he had a sack in week 2 as well. It's a big deal when you've got a defensive lineman, one of those big guys in the middle that's causing disruption like that. I mean, you expect your pass rushers like Gary, Vaness, Preston Smith to get the sacks. But when you got a big guy making plays like that, it's a big deal. So it's cool to see him making plays like that. And yeah, McKinney does it again. 3 picks in 3 weeks. I mean, I don't want him to stop at 3 picks. Let's keep it going. But yeah, it's fun to see. This Packers defense is exciting.
It's a beautiful thing to see, and they're going to have a challenge on their hands upcoming. We'll get to that in a second. Let's head over to the offensive side. Were you hearing all of this Malik Willis? Like, is Jordan Love afraid for his job chatter that happened on Monday morning? Were you hearing that?
Yeah, I saw
everywhere.
a little bit of it, but I mean, if it was like a Facebook post or a social media post, I'd look at the comments, and basically all the comments were saying how ridiculous that statement is. I mean, I don't think Jordan Love has to worry about his starting position once he's healthy. What I do think is Malik Willis obviously has made a statement. He's shown that he's a solid quarterback. Whatever it was in Tennessee, it just wasn't the right fit, or he wasn't developed enough, or didn't have the right coaching. Whatever it was, that's changed now. And the Packers traded for him in hopes to, I think, develop him into a solid backup, which they already have in the short time that he's been in Green Bay. But now that he's shown how much he's grown and how talented he actually is, I don't think he lasts long in Green Bay. I think we're going to have other teams. I mean, it might be tough for them to try and pick him up this season, but the Miami Dolphins are hurting for a quarterback right now.
Yeah.
There's always going to be those teams throughout the league that need a guy to come in and start for them because of injury, or because, their starting quarterback, who they thought was going to be their starter for the season, is struggling really bad. There's going to be plenty of those teams that are looking for a guy like Malik Willis now that everyone has seen how well he can play. So it's a good thing that he showed up and balled out for these past 2 games. But on the other hand, I don't think we see him in a Packers uniform for very long with how well he's played.
Yeah, I just had a lot of people that came up to me, and I thought they were kidding, but I don't know, there was a little bit too much seriousness in their tone of voice. I mean, this is I went on the record a few weeks ago stating that the backup quarterback, it's hard enough to find 32 starting quarterbacks to be competitive. And that when your starting quarterback goes out, It is. It's tough to survive. You just need a guy to carry you a couple games. And who is that guy going to be? Well, Malik Willis has shown that he can, under the right coaching, kind of flourish and follow a system. Against Indiana, or Indianapolis Colts, he finished with a 126.8 quarterback rating. Against the Tennessee Titans just this last week, 120.9 quarterback rating. He finished top 5 in quarterback rating in the last 2 weeks. And again, it goes back to belief. The coaches believed in him, this wide receiving group. Everyone rallied around him. And that's all he really needed. He needed structure and people that could buy in. I'm trying not to say believe too much, but buy in and rally around him. And he went out there, and just like he did against the Colts, he didn't do too much. He didn't do too little. He did just the right amount. When we needed to pick up a 3rd and 18, he threw a perfect dime to Romeo Dobbs to keep that drive alive and keep the clock ticking in the Packers' favor. Absolutely incredible. And I agree. I'm not entirely sure we'll see him in a Packers uniform again, but this is the ultimate, like, buy your stock low and sell high. They traded away from Malik Willis for a 7th round draft pick. And come the end of the season, they could get, dare I say, a 2nd or 3rd round draft pick for this guy and have that as leverage going into next season. I don't know if they'll want to. I think they'd rather hang on to the guy, but it's definitely a possibility. Outside of the quarterback play, because Malik Willis played well, the rushing game had some momentum. The passing game had some momentum. The offensive line, a little suspect at times, but things were clicking in pretty much all 3 phases. Again, Daniel Whelan had a great outing at punter. I love myself some Daniel Whelan. And then Norvison statistically went 3 for 3 at field goals and 3 for 3 on extra points, but he got away with a missed 48-yarder thanks to a tug and pull defensive penalty. So yeah, things were clicking on the offensive side of the ball. And again, it just it takes a lot of pressure off of that offense and that quarterback when the defense can perform as well as they did.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really what happened. The Packers were able to blitz heavy in that late in that game, kind of make Will Levis scramble. And they played with the lead for 95% of the game, but that makes a huge difference. And it's a beautiful thing to see that we have someone behind Jordan Love if he needs to go out for another week or two, if he gets COVID toe or something crazy like that.
COVID toe.
Oh, you remember that?
Yeah, I do. I do. That's a good throwback.
Yeah.
I mean, Titans fans or the Titans organization, I mean, they might be kicking themselves right now. I mean, with the play that they've seen from Will Levis so far this year compared to how well Malik Willis played the last couple of weeks, they might be kicking themselves a little bit. Talking about the running game and the offensive line, to stick with our format of the good, the bad, the ugly the last couple of weeks, we've already hit my good. I was going to take one or the other, but we've really talked about both. I had Malik Willis. Obviously, he played extremely well, led the team to a victory. And then I had the defense, which, I mean, you could say for what part of the Packers team led them to a victory, Malik Willis and the defense are probably about even, I would say. So yeah, we hit both of those things. Now to the bad and the ugly. What I have down for bad was Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs, I mean, didn't run the ball very well. He had less rushing yards than Emmanuel Wilson, which good for Wilson. Wilson played really well, had a touchdown. So it was good to see the rushing game still going strong. But Jacobs just did not look. He got bottled up a lot. He didn't have any big explosive plays. So it was kind of concerning to see Jacobs not perform as well as we know that he can. But part of that certainly could have been the penalties. That's what I have down for the ugly. And I actually, during the game, I had noted this. It seemed to be every single time Josh Jacobs did break off for a decent run, it was called back because of penalty. Every single time. So saying Jacobs played poorly, if some of those runs, those decent runs, those chunk plays that he was able to get, if they didn't get called back, maybe he builds some momentum and has a bigger game. So the penalties were awful, especially left tackle Rasheed Walker. I heard his name way too many times. Holding.
And what's your motto when it comes to offensive linemen?
If you don't hear an offensive lineman's name, That's probably a good thing.
Yeah,
So if we're
it's
hearing
true.
his an offensive lineman in the broadcast being his name being called all the time, that's definitely not good. So it was frustrating for sure. Because like I said, it seemed to be every single time Jacobs broke off for a decent run, called back because of holding, called back because of, most of it was holding, but there were some other penalties in there too. Penalties. They're shooting yourself in the foot every time it happens. Like, you can't have that. So I think the Packers as a whole need to work on that. But that was my ugly for week 3.
So I'll piggyback off you because I didn't necessarily do a good, bad, and ugly this week because so much was good. But if there's a bad and ugly, you nailed it exactly right on the head. When it comes to the rushing side of it, you're right. So Jacobs had 4 rushes in particular, a 4-yard, a 5-yard, and a 5-yard that were all called back for penalties. But then he also had a 26-yard run that got called back for a penalty as well. So that's an addition, that 39 yards of rushing that Jacobs could have had in his back pocket. Perhaps it's always a tricky thing to gauge because maybe if the holding doesn't happen, maybe he doesn't break for the yard. It's a catch 22, if you will.
Right.
But I
That's
agree.
why they call the penalty.
Right? Exactly. So maybe that run doesn't happen, but suffice it to say, 4 penalties on Josh Jacobs' runs that negated 39 yards of running. And that would have gotten him to about that 90-yard mark as far as rushing, which is a good performance, especially when you have Emmanuel Wilson pulling up 12 carries for 50 yards. It's between your 2 running backs, excluding Malik Willis, who ran for 73 yards. I mean, that's 130, 140 yards of production on your running backs. It's exactly what you want in a balanced offense. Somewhere in that 100 to 120, quarterbacks throwing 200 to 300 yards. That's, in theory, should be an efficient offense. But the penalties is a problem. The Packers have 26 penalties so far this year, amounting to 196 yards. And this does not count against or include like offsetting penalties or anything like that. This is just what was counted against them. So Matt LaFleur made an emphasis on Monday, sat down with the team, penalties, penalties, penalties. If we're talking about, I mean, I'm foreshadowing maybe a little bit about what we need to do to beat the Minnesota Vikings this week, but they got to clean this up. They had 10 against the Tennessee Titans, 10 specifically that amounted for, oh boy, 75 yards just against the Titans on Sunday, excuse me. So yeah, they got to clean up the penalties. But I'm not as concerned about Josh Jacobs. It's tough. I'm sure you're not either. I mean, you put him in a bad category because we're just nitpicking to find maybe some things that weren't beautiful or
Exactly.
believable when it came last week. But yeah, it all boils down to cleaning up that offensive side. And it's not so much really, it's the ones like Preston Smith lining up in the neutral zone that negated a sack for Rashawn Gary. Those are the ones that just are infuriating. It's the ones that are false starts. You're going to have holding penalties occasionally throughout the game. That's just how that goes. Somebody breaks away from you and you get caught outside the pad, lose your technique. It's going to happen. But it's the other ones that are preventable, that are maddening. And there were a couple times, and probably the last thing that I'll say about this game, there was a couple times where there were penalties that I'm like, oh God, there's a drive killer right there. It's 1st and 20, and Malik Willis is our quarterback. But they were able to pick that up. Those, again, kudos to Malik Willis on that offense. They were able to dig themselves out of that, but that's against a bad football team. And they won't be playing bad football teams every game this season. They're going to have to clean that up. And I'd rather them get it out and out of their system this early in the season. And I think it's going to be a huge focus heading into week 4 against the Vikings.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of my one of my notes about this upcoming game. So should we get into it? Should we start talking Packers Vikings? Vikings have been a big surprise this year. I mean, both of us with our preseason expectations did not expect the Vikings to start the season out 3-0. We talked about it in overtime a little bit last week, how I had a feeling that this week 3 game against the Texans was going to be the game that they, come back down to earth. Texans are a very good team, but it's hard to say dominated. I mean, the overall final score was a little bit misleading. It wasn't, as big of a bloodbath as it looks. They led 14-0 up until about halfway through the third quarter, something like that. So it wasn't like they started hot and ran away with it right away. It was kind of slow going, but I mean, their defense played well. Their offense has looked really good. So yeah, this Vikings team it's a tough week. for the Packers. It's always a tough week against a divisional opponent, though.
So yeah, look here. When I look ahead to the Minnesota Vikings, I'm maybe this is just how this is always going to be. I like to look back before I look forward. I'm a retrospective son of a bitch, if you will. So they beat the Giants 28-6. You had the Giants in that week one, Matt. I
I
think,
did.
and that's fine. I hate just throwing you under the bus, but I would have too. Well, I think none of us expected a whole lot of production out of the Minnesota Vikings. To your point, 49ers head to Minnesota. That was, I think, a surprise to all of us. You asked me last week, is this the time that Vikings fans are starting to believe and get excited? We took down the 49ers. I wasn't hearing a whole lot of it last week. And then they come out, and I would say they demolish the Texans. 34-7 is a pretty large victory. Yes, it was 14-0 with a little bit of time left to go in the third quarter, but man, they ran away with it so much that they pulled DJ Stroud out with like 5-6 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. They didn't even keep him in the game. But this is a very surprising team. And when we get to overtime and talk about our power rankings, I think a lot of us, I'm not denying the impressive performances that I've seen from this group over in Minnesota. These are two very similar football teams. The Minnesota Vikings and the Green Bay Packers both have great coaching staffs. They've been able, you see what LaFleur has done with Willis, and now you've seen what O'Connell has done with Sam Darnold, who was essentially on life support after his failed career out there in the New York Jets. Is that where he was? Correct?
Oh, God. Sam Darnold's been all over the place. I feel like, maybe the Jets was the most recent. No, Carolina. That was his most recent team.
Carolina was the most recent. Well, so you got both of these quarterbacks on life support that the coaching and the coaching staffs have been able to mold their quarterbacks to be successful. And I look at tape on the Minnesota Vikings, and I'm looking at Sam Darnold, and I'm thinking the exact same things that I'm thinking about Malik Willis. He's doing the right amount. He's connecting on passes when you need passes to be connected on. And for the most part, he's not turning over the football. And it's supported by a very good run game in the backfield with Aaron Jones, just like we're seeing with the support of Emmanuel Wilson and Josh Jacobs. They have top 10 offensive lines on both teams. They have top 10 defenses on both teams. And it's just kind of a mirror image of what we're seeing. And they're both coming into this game with a little bit of belief, if you'll hear me out on this one. The Vikings have officially hit that pinnacle that, okay, we beat the Giants. We're not that bad of a football team. We took down what many people still had as one or two in their power rankings with the 49ers. Yes, they didn't have Christian McCaffrey, but we took them down. And then they took down the hot Houston Texans that many people have not only winning that division, but making the playoffs and perhaps making a deep playoff run. So that team is bought in. 100% they're bought in. That their pass rush is a problem that needs to be addressed as we foreshadow the keys to victory.
I think they had 5 sacks last week as well.
They've had 5 sacks, at least 5 sacks in the first 3 games. So this defense is just getting pressure on the quarterback. They're causing mistakes. They're causing the Brock Purdy's to force throws. They're causing CJ Stroud to force throws, creating turnovers on top of that. Flores out there in Minnesota has the buy-in of his defense, just like the Packers have the buy-in with Jeff Hafley. I see this game as a mirror of very similar teams, and it's going to be one hell of a fun game. And I love that this is a week 4 game and not like win and get into the playoff game or maybe get eliminated from the playoffs game, because this is just going to be a battle between two teams that we're going to really get a chance to figure out what we have. And the Vikings are going to figure out what they have. And regardless of what happens, both teams are going to carry on about their season. The whole season's ahead of them, but it's a really good litmus test for both teams to kind of maybe solidify what we think we know and what we might be surprised about. I love it. I love this game.
Yeah, I agree. I was having the same feelings when I was going through Minnesota's overall stats so far on the season, their stats from their last couple of games. I was literally thinking the same thing, that these two teams are very similar. You laid it all out, so I'm not going to go through it all again. But some things that are going to be super important are, you mentioned Sam Darnold is supported by a really good rushing game. That's going to be a big deal for the Packers. Aaron Jones has played extremely well so far this season. I think he had just under 150 total yards last week against the Texans, and he's looked stellar. And I think that's the difference maker for the Vikings offense. I mean, obviously they have Justin Jefferson, who's arguably the best receiver in the league right now. But there were questions coming into the season with the quarterbacks that were going to be throwing to him. I don't know if it I don't know if it necessarily matters what quarterback is thrown to Justin Jefferson. He's just that good. But I think the big reason why the Vikings have seen so much success is because of Aaron Jones, because of him running the ball and catching it out of the backfield. So that's going to be a key factor in this game against the Packers. The linebackers, Quay Walker, Isaiah McDuffie, they're gonna have to put a stop to Aaron Jones in the run game and in the pass game. So that was one thing that I kind of noted. He's averaging almost 5.5 yards per carry this year. I mentioned how many yards he had total last week. Vikings defense has also played super well. They're averaging 10 points allowed per game so far this season, which is pretty stellar. And last week they had 5 sacks, 2 interceptions. But again, just like we talked about, it's mirroring what the Packers defense has done this year, holding teams to, not every game like the Vikings have, but holding teams to lower scores. And just like last week, 8 sacks, 3 turnovers for the Packers, very similar. One thing that I think is something the Packers defense can capitalize on, I think that if the Packers defense can get the Vikings to a third down, Vikings are averaging less than 50% conversion rate on third down. So I think that's a big point in the game that the Packers can take advantage. If they can get them to third down, they've struggled there. So it's about stopping the big plays on first and second down. Yeah, it's going to be a fight. It's going to be a battle for sure. I'm excited. It's always exciting, Packers Vikings, but this week especially is one I'm going to probably make some popcorn for.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. I love the competition. I love that. I mean, I'd watched the highlights. This is probably the most like I've watched the previous team games, maybe because it's week 3 and I actually have some games, or week 4 and I actually have some games to watch. But I went back and watched the Texans game. I watched the 49ers game. And I'm like, what is making these Vikings click as well as they have? And I'm not a super, ESPN NFL Network analyst, but what I'm seeing them do is they're using Aaron Jones very similar to how the Packers used to use Aaron Jones. And they'll have some quick runs up the middle, but they like those screen passes. They love off into the flat. They'll throw it to him and they'll give Aaron Jones the ball in space and let him make moves and maneuver, pick up 10, 15, 20, or maybe he breaks it and goes crazy for a long pickup. So they really like to use that. But this is a team, I mean, they're absolutely dominating their opponents. They have a plus 55 point differential in the first 3 weeks, which is second best in franchise histories. So they're just blowing teams out. It's not even close. And then they are attacking the quarterback. They're getting to the quarterback. They're blitzing 64% of the time. And if it's a fourth down, they're 100% on fourth down of blitzing, doing an all-out blitz on the quarterback. So they're playing aggressive. They're playing smart. They're not. Sam Darnold does have a couple turnovers. I guess the Vikings in general have given away 4 turnovers on the season. So, I mean, they're managing to make up for that with the rest of their production on both the offensive and defense side of the ball. But yeah, Green Bay leads the league with 9 total turnovers, but Minnesota's only a few spots down, 6 overall, with 6 total turnovers, and 5 of those being interceptions and 1 of them being a fumble. Like I said, it's a mirror image. And it's going to be crucial, if we will, to make sure that the quarterback is getting time in the pocket or that Matt LaFleur is getting creative with his play calling if we're going to have a chance to tie up these another W and get to first in the division. That's the one thing I haven't even said yet. I mean, whoever wins this game will be in first place in the division. Ooh, there's a lot on the line. With that being said, I think we kind of foreshadowed some of the keys to victory or X factors, but let's talk about injuries officially.
Yeah.
I might have gone over that previously in this recording, but my intention is to edit that entire thing out because it's really important. What boils down to this game is whether or not Jordan Love plays. And I think both of you and I have very similar feelings on how this game pans out. I have no idea what your score prediction is ultimately going to be.
I don't either.
Jordan Love, for me, has to play if the Packers are going to win this game. This is and I think that's the huge difference maker. The defense will have its way with Sam Darnold and that offense. I think that they'll be able to create some havoc, force turnovers, because they're going to have to essentially get him off of his spot and make him make some plays. But if Jordan Love's not in this game, it's a whole different dichotomy of what this score could be or how this thing could turn out. So Jordan Love practiced last week. He did warm up on Sunday in Tennessee. There was maybe a glimmer of hope that he might start, but he did end up sitting. My assumption, my gut belief is that he's going to be healthy enough to play. Now, does that mean that he plays? I think that's ultimately where we stopped last time I talked about this, because again, that Vikings rush is no fucking joke. And there's my one curse word in this episode. And do you really want to bring a Jordan Love back when there is that defense potentially coming at you to cause all sorts of problems?
Yeah, it's a conundrum.
Real quick,
It's a conundrum.
How about before you answer that, do you think Jordan Love will play on Sunday? What does your gut tell you? You do?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do think that he plays on Sunday. Just looking at the limited practices last week, the warm up before Sunday's game in week 3, he wasn't taking it easy in warm-ups on Sunday. I mean, he was warming up like he was getting ready to play. He looks to me like he's healing well, moving well. I feel like everything is pointing to him playing this week. But I 100% agree with you. That's the difference maker in this game. Like you said, these two teams mirror each other. They're very similar, but the Packers have been without Jordan Love for the last 2 weeks, and they still mirror each other without Jordan Love. So I feel like Jordan Love's the difference maker in this game. Yep. You put him into that, I think it puts the Packers a step above the Vikings. You know, every other aspect, they kind of mirror each other and cancel each other out, except for the quarterback play. I firmly believe that Jordan Love is a better quarterback than Sam Darnold. So I think that's the difference maker. That's the key. So it's hard to know. We don't know if Jordan Love is going to be playing or not for sure. I feel that he will, which is going to make the difference.
Yeah, and I was so just wrapped up in what you were saying and enjoying what you were saying. I completely lost my train of thought. Mm-hmm. But
I have that effect on people.
You nailed it. With the mirroring concept is with Malik Willis. It is not with Jordan Love. And so you get Jordan Love in here, and the Vikings have not, I would argue the Vikings have not played Packers podcast. I'll just say it. They have not played a quarterback the caliber of Jordan Love this year. And what I mean by that is Daniel Jones, garbage. Brock Purdy, I'm not as high on Brock Purdy as maybe some of the rest of the NFL is. He's got a crazy supporting cast around him. And with Christian McCaffrey out, we've seen that offense kind of flutter these last 2 weeks. And then you have CJ Stroud. Yes, I think his ceiling is extremely high, but he's only coming into his second year. He got hot at the end of last season, put some crazy, a crazy playoff performance together, but he still has a lot to learn, a lot to grow. I think Jordan Love coming into this is his 5th season. They've not faced a quarterback like that. And if Jordan Love is healthy, that's going to be the difference maker. I agree with you 100%. So with that being said, what's your key to victory? What's your X factor, your key to victory? And then we'll get to score predictions. We'll wrap this bitch up. We'll head on over to overtime. We'll have a couple more drinks. We'll have some fun and we'll get ready for Sunday. By the way, this just dawned on me. It's hard to do these on Tuesday nights. Like week 3 just ended last night, right?
I know.
Have you noticed?
Right? Yeah.
And it's like, I got to look forward to week 4 now. I don't even know if I've had time to digest all that yet, but go ahead. Yeah. What's your...
Well, and it's difficult also because we just talked about injuries. We know zero about what the injury report looks like. There's plenty of news that comes out after Tuesday. So it also makes it difficult because we really have no information going into week 4. So, but getting back to X factors for this week, is it okay with you if I give 2 different X factors depending on what happens with Jordan Love, whether he starts or not?
I guess, I mean, it depends what your X factors are, for sure.
Okay.
My assumption is that Jordan Love will play on Sunday against the Vikings. If he doesn't play, Christian, I don't even need an X factor. I don't need a score prediction. Vikings are going to fucking just destroy the Packers.
Really? You think
Malik
so?
Willis. Yes.
You're not a believer?
No, they're that good. I'm okay saying that. So my assumption is Jordan Love is playing.
All right. Well, let's start with that one then. I am going to give both because it is a possibility that Jordan Love doesn't play. With the assumption that he does play, both of us feel that he will. My X factor this week is not necessarily Jordan Love. I've already said that I think he's the difference maker because these two teams kind of mirror each other and he's that difference. The quarterback play is the difference. But my X factor is going to be the left tackle, Rasheed Walker.
All right.
He needs to protect Jordan Love. As you've mentioned, the Vikings pass rush has been ruthless. He needs to perform better. He needs to clean up his play, and he needs to protect Jordan Love. That's my X factor. If Jordan Love doesn't have time in the pocket, I don't know. I don't know that the Packers get a win out of this one. So
can I counter real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
If Jordan Love plays, I think that Jordan is knowledgeable enough for quick read options for passes. I think that they can handle that pass rush a whole lot better with a Jordan Love back there because he has experience. Look what he did to Dallas last year. I mean, that was one of the best rush defenses that that team had to face, and they were picking them apart. There were receivers wide open. So I'm not discrediting it. I agree. Like Rasheed Walker and that offensive line needs to perform and step up. They're also my X factor, by the way. That offensive line needs to play really well. Like but I'm going to pick a different one. But my argument would be that Malik Willis won't be able to rely on his scrambling ability as much because I think Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores are going to be able to plan against that. But Jordan Love, I think, has a better shot at facing a suspect Rasheed Walker performance. What do you got on the other side of it, though? Sorry to interject.
Yes. Nope. That's okay. I think it's funny that you had the same X factor.
Yeah.
I thought I was getting different with it, and that's the exact same thing you were thinking. So,
I got something else in my back pocket.
I agree with you. In general, the offensive line has to pass protect well. I just singled out Rasheed Walker because he had a poor game last week. So that's why I singled him out. But in general, the offensive line needs to play well. Now, if Jordan Love does not play, which certainly is a possibility, don't know if that's going to happen. But if it's Malik Willis at starting quarterback, I think my X factor is going to be the Packers linebackers. I kind of mentioned it before. Quay Walker, Isaiah McDuffie. They are going to need to shut down Aaron Jones in the running game and in the passing game. You mentioned seems to be the Vikings like those screen passes out to Aaron Jones. McDuffie, the last 2 weeks, there's been specific plays where it's been a screen pass out to the flat on a third and 5 or 6. And if McDuffie isn't there to stop it right away, they likely pick up the first down. So it's plays like that need to continue to happen. And they just got to shut Aaron Jones down. I think he's the reason why this Vikings offense has flourished. So if we can shut Aaron Jones down, I think the defensive backfield, Jair and Xavier McKinney, can shut down Justin Jefferson. And outside of those two playmakers, Vikings don't have a lot on offense. So that's my X factor is the Packers linebackers, Walker and McDuffie, shutting down Aaron Jones.
I mean, you're exactly right. The Vikings, ever since they lost Dalvin Cook, have been lacking that reliable running back in that backfield. They tried a little bit with Alexander Madison the last couple seasons, and he has some success here and there. But Aaron Jones is a difference maker, and it's funny because so many teams will be like, "Oh man, if I only had a quarterback, our team would be so much better." For the Vikings, it's been obvious that if they only had a good running back, that's always been. I mean, go back to Adrian Peterson, that's always been like a running back football team. When they've been successful, they've had a good running back in that backfield. And Aaron Jones has been able to supplement that so far in the first 3 weeks. He kind of had a down week against the Niners, only 32 rushing yards against the Niners, but 102 yards last week against Houston, 94 against the Giants in week 1. passing yards. He's averaging right around 40 yards in the receiving game. This is why the Packers went out there and they drafted speed, right? They got Edgerrin Cooper in the draft, and he played 16 snaps last week against the Titans. I would not be surprised if we see a little bit more Edgerrin Cooper on Sunday against the Vikings, because he is faster than McDuffie. He brings that speed element and can possibly lock that up and knock that down in the backfield before it kind of gets a little bit too crazy away from him. So we talked about offensive line. And yes, the offensive line is going to have to perform because this Vikings team, as we've mentioned, is a sack heavy, blitz heavy type of team, averaging 5 sacks a game over the first 3 weeks. But outside of that, if I'm going to pick a different key to victory or a different X factor, I'm going to go with the turnover battle. Both of these teams have been able, not only mirroring each other. Was that going to be your other one? Was that going to?
I have that written down too.
That's perfectly fine. So both of these defenses and these teams in general have been able to excel and kind of pull away in these victories the last couple of weeks because of the turnover difference and what the defense has been able to do. So protecting the ball is going to be crucial. The team that wins the turnover battle will most likely win this game because it will garner momentum for the other team. And it's just a difference maker at the end of the day. So the Packers can take a couple away from either Aaron Jones or Sam Darnold or the vice versa. If Love throws another interception, we don't know, but they have to win the turnover battle. They have to protect the ball. I'm not too concerned about time of possession with this. Quite frankly, Houston won the time of possession against the Vikings last week and still got their asses handed to them 34-7. So it's not
They
really
had more total yards too.
absolutely. And that's not the statistics that we're looking at. We're looking at when are these turnovers happening? Are they happening? Or are both teams going to be able to secure the ball and hang on to it? So, moment of truth, let's get to score predictions. I made you go last week, and you're teeter-tottering on this whole, is Love going to play? Is Malik Willis going to play? I've already said it previous in this recording, but for TikTok purposes, I will say that if Malik Willis plays, it's not even close. This is not a game if Malik Willis plays. I do have a score prediction if Malik Willis plays, and that lovely thing is 10-27. I think the Vikings absolutely run away with this thing if the Vikings have to face Malik Willis. I'm curious. I mean, I've seen you scratch your chin over there. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. But I do think Love plays. And with Love playing, this is not only his first home game of the season. It's not the first division matchup of the season. It's the first game that he gets to play on grass that doesn't slip out underneath his feet. And he can go out there and kick some ass. And I expect Love to play. And I'm confidently saying that the Packers will win if Love is out there on the field, so much that it's 30-20 if the Packers have Jordan Love under center. That's my score prediction. I want to do 30-17, but I picked 17 the last couple of weeks. So I'm giving them an extra 3 points. All right. I'm okay with that.
As far as your score prediction, if it ends up being Malik Willis as the starter, honestly, I agree with that. 10-27 is what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I might have put it a little bit closer than that, but that seems fairly reasonable. This Vikings team has played very well. So I'll just go to the Jordan Love being the starter. Jordan Love coming back to Green Bay, like you said, balling out, kicking some ass on some real grass. I'm going to go, and your score prediction is very close to what I was going to say. I'm going 31-23 Packers.
All right. All right. So why do you think we feel so confident that is it just the fact that Love is the difference maker in this game? I mean, we're not doing like,
I think there's,
I think it'd be really easy to look at this matchup and see that, in multiple power rankings throughout the league, these Packers and Vikings are very close. We've talked about how they're very close. It'd be easy to say this is like a 31-28 game or a 30-27 game, something like that. I think we both agree that there's going to be points scored, even though these defenses are really good. But why do you think that we're that confident with Love in there? Is it just blind fate? And
I think that there's something to say about playing at home, especially at Lambeau. Playing at Lambeau for any team is difficult. It's a divisional matchup. Those games are always tough and usually a fight. I think this Packers defense, they've taken steps up each game this year, and I still think they haven't reached their full potential. So I think the Packers defense is going to take another step up and outplay the Vikings defense. But yeah, I mean, Jordan Love, that's a big deal. Extremely good quarterback play makes even bad teams successful. Look at the Kansas City Chiefs. We'll get to power rankings later, but in most power rankings, the Kansas City Chiefs are the best team, or number one in power rankings.
Yeah.
That's pretty much because of Patrick Mahomes. They don't have a ton of big names around him, and yet they win week in and week out and are number one in the power rankings right now. So that next level quarterback play is the difference maker for this Packers Vikings game.
All right. So number one in the division. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? Love gets hurt, and we have a shot in week 4 to take first place in the division. I have a lot of thoughts on what you just say, so I think we should kick it over to overtime. That's a tease for all of you who are checking out at this point. Check out our overtime episode. It usually airs somewhere, Thursday night, Friday morning. It's suspect. We'll get it aired Thursday night. So until next time, we'll see you in overtime, but we'll also see you on the internet. Thanks for watching.